Well, hello friends, this is Tommy Oakes, and this is the Story Break. Tonight, I want to tell some stories about a certain type of person. And I hope you have an appreciation for that type of person, because the type of person I want to tell stories about tonight is preachers. Now, I love preachers. Some of my best friends are preachers. As a matter of fact, I myself am a preacher, if you didn't know that, and I've been known to preach quite a few sermons. So nothing personal here, but I always enjoy a good story about a preacher. And here's one of my favorites. It seems there was a preacher's wife who got really concerned about her husband's health. Well, she talked and pled with him and finally convinced him to go to the doctor. Well, the doctor examined him and he was a little concerned too. So after the examination, he pulled the preacher's wife aside and he whispered to her, "I don't much like the way he looks." His wife looked around and whispered and said, "Neither do I, but he's a pretty good preacher." And that's the end of that. Well, here's another one about a preacher, and I hope you like it too. It seems there was a preacher who decided that he needed to modernize things around the building that he preached in. So he paid for it himself and had these hot air hand dryers installed in all the bathroom. You just push a button and put your hands under there and get your hands all dry. Well, after they got installed, he just left them in there a couple of weeks and then he went and took them all out. One of his friends came to him and said, "How come you to take all those hot air hand dryers out of the bathrooms?" He said, "Well, I'll tell you why." He said, "I went in one of the bathrooms last week and somebody had taped a note on one of those hand dryers. And it said this: 'For a sample of this week's sermon, push the button.'" And that's the end of that. Well, before we quit tonight, let me tell you one more. It seems the Sunday school teacher was trying to talk to her children about behavior in church. Her classroom was downstairs, and they always met every Sunday right before everyone would go upstairs for the big assembly and the message. And so the Sunday school teacher was talking to her students about being quiet. And she said, "Now, children, do you know why we all need to be quiet when we go upstairs?" The little girl raised her hand and said, "Because people are sleeping." Well, let me tell you one more before I quit. It seems that there was a preacher who had a reputation for being a bit on the long-winded side. Well, one Sunday he got up and began to preach, and he noticed as he got into his sermon that one of his buddies, a man that he was a good friend of, got up and walked out. He came back in about the time the preacher was concluding his sermon. So afterwards, he saw that man in the hall of the church building, went up to him, and he said, "How come you to leave in my sermon this morning?" The man said, "I went to get a haircut." The preacher said, "Well, why didn't you get your haircut before the service started?" The man said, "I didn't need one then." And that's the end of that. Well, look, if you have a preacher, you might want to call him in to listen to some of these stories. I think he'll appreciate them, and I hope you appreciate your preacher. So that's the story for tonight. I hope you come back next time.